Hey there, friend. You're listening to The Hot Mess Outline, and this is Stephanie Krebins. You are in the right place if you're an ambitious leader who's charged with delivering on the tech of the future right now. In order to do that, you and your team must upskill and tackle old problems with new ways of thinking. In the past, we would have called this change management and leadership development. But change is now the air we breathe, and your team needs a unified strategy for the 21st century. That's what we have for you right here. These executive level conversations are nuanced, insightful, and hard-earned lessons that you can put into practice as soon as this episode is over. Small tweaks have huge impact. Take what's new and useful to you and leave the rest. Today's conversation is with Brian Burk. He began his healthcare and life science career as a pharmaceutical and medical device representative. And now he is a successful serial healthcare tech entrepreneur who's won multiple awards along the way. He's going to tell us about his experience at a recent healthcare tech company and how he made them even more successful in his tenure there. But I think what's most important is if you get to know Brian, if you spend any amount of time with him, you're not just going to hear about his successful career and what he's done in business. He's going to tell you about what a proud dad he is and the amount of unplugged time that he spends with his family as much as possible to balance out all that technology trouble he gets into on a daily basis. All right, with that, let's get into this conversation and how Brian experienced a new culture around, we don't do that around here, and what Brian did to address it. Let's go. Brian, tell us about your hot mess, please.
So I walked in the door 3 years ago during the height of COVID to what I would affectionately call a 21-year-old startup.
Mm-hmm.
The founder still here, still contributing, top line positive, bottom line positive, but lots and lots of operational problems. In addition, brand new office no one ever moved into, and no one's ever worked remote. Now, how do you fix all of the things that are going wrong when there's no plan, there's no people, and we're doing healthcare? So we actually power more than 250 clinical care locations 24/7. No room for error. So
yeah.
That was my hot mess.
I love it. So your clients are in a hot mess. So we know their attention span is everywhere, but they have some really critical needs from their technology provider. I'm going to add to, and tell me if I'm off base, when you're top line positive, bottom line positive, operationally, people don't have a big incentive to change because a lot of the metrics we look to say, are we being successful? In your case, are being successful. Agree or disagree?
Oh, absolutely. What I inherited was, right, is folks, this is the way we've always done it.
Yep.
And one of the things I was able to share is that the majority of the decisions made in the past were the right ones. However, clients have evolved, technology has evolved, competition has evolved, and COVID, right? So now there's a whole other set of needs that's evolved.
Yeah, just a global freaking pandemic, no big deal.
Yeah. So we have to make new decisions while still preserving and not stepping on toes, right? Because folks will say, hey, I've always done it this way. You know, it brings me, I love this little anecdote story is 3 generations of women are in the kitchen. So there's the guy's wife, his mother-in-law, and his grandmother-in-law. And his wife cuts the end of the ham off and puts it in a pan and puts it in the oven. And he said, hey, honey, I don't know why, but why'd you cut the end of the ham off? And she almost chastises him a little bit and says, well, why would you ask me?
Yeah.
Right? That's just how you do it. Well,
yeah.
You don't cook. And she said, Mom, tell him. And she says, well, that's the way I was taught. And she says, Grandmom, tell him. And she says, girls, I don't know what you're talking about. I had to cut the end of the ham off because at that time, that was all the bigger size of pan that I had in order to put it in the oven.
Yes.
So we often inherit decisions of predecessors or processes or even the ethos of the ecosystem we're in. And it's not to be challenging everything as in rebellion. It's to challenge yourself. Can we do better?
Yes. Because constraints change.
They do.
Yes.
Moore's law, processing power, et cetera, all that changes. Yes. So do margins and everything else.
Yep.
So that was the hot mess. Now, knowing that we have to change things, the challenge is great. Where do you get new ideas? Because inherent with what came with the 21-year-old company startup is that the majority of people had been here for, the shortest was 8 years, but most folks were here for 10 to 20 years. So that means there's a lot of endogenous thinking.
Endogenous thinking? What does that mean?
So, meaning within. And so it's a politically tactful way of sharing that is a closed door system.
Oh, I've never heard that word before. Okay.
Right.
All right, cool.
So how do I introduce the opposite, exogenous thinking, right? Mm-hmm. Factors from the outside and bring them in. And how will they not be ruffle feathers? How can we integrate new ideas and yet change that tire while the car is still moving?
Yes. So my question for you is, at this stage of the story, why then? Why you? Why?
So hierarchically answering that is what I believe in retrospect. It was inferred, but never really spelled out to me. Mm-hmm. I was brought in because of the role that I had before this was a enterprise scale, right? I was a global leader of healthcare at Verizon.
Okay. And
before that, I have run other enterprise scale companies in healthcare technology. So I believe that was, and the owners and the board shared that they know that they had growth issues, that the company was steady state and really wasn't having the growth that one would think it should have.
Okay.
And at the same time, they had been experiencing more and more technology issues with their provider. Because of that, right? So we had service issue, we had global pandemic issue, and then we have financial issue. Hey, how can we make more money?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and most astute business owners, you can feel the plateau coming in your growth before it shows up in the numbers, I believe. I mean, I feel like I see that in my business, and we're a tiny team, but you feel the plateau coming before it shows up in the financials. And if you're paying attention to your external environment, you're like, we should be doing more than this. We should be serving more. The pain is so great out there. We should be doing more to solve it, but we're not. So what's amiss?
So those indicators were there, but prior to my coming, COVID just exacerbated that, yes. Right? But those indicators weren't remediated. So that was part of the ask, or part of the directive, not the ask, by the board, is to stop that. One of the first things I did is require everyone to turn their camera on. So because they were so used to working with each other and walking down the hall and connecting, but now they weren't. And I knew that productivity was lost, what it is that human capital, that human exchange.
Yep.
So they had been using technology, but only as a phone call. And why? Is because no one is really used to working. No, the world wasn't used to working remotely. So one of the things I immediately changed as company policy was that the cameras had to be on. And for a while, I saw lots of unmade beds, Tupperware on top of the refrigerator. And then it sounds simple, but just everyone had to wear a collared shirt and use our digital background, right? Unless you're in the office. So it brought everyone in, it kind of unified, right? Trying to get everyone unified. One of the next things I did is then I invited the entire leadership team, and we did 6 weeks of going through Playing to Win. So Playing to Win is by Lafley and Martin, and it's a series of 5 real simplistic cascading questions. There's lots of strategy books out there. Yep. You and I've read many of them, and there's How to Do a Business Plan. This is but one of them. It's a very good one. Okay. But when I asked everyone, what's the aspiration, right? What's the aspiration of this company? And then, okay, got it. Where precisely are we going to play? And then how will we win? Not how will we play? Because playing just means that you're eventually going to go out of business.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right? How do you play to win? That's different. And then if we want to win, what do we need to get there? what systems and people and capabilities, and then what's required for management. That was the last thing. So we did 6 weeks of that, so that way they were able to, the first time, help design the company's future, which also means that you have to address the lacks of that day, right?
Yes.
Those elements that are lacking. So now that we have that, then there's the other. It's kind of like, okay, if we know we're going to do this journey, we know we need this. Looking around, we may not have all the parts we need.
Yes. Can I ask you a question? You said, we have to be willing to admit what we're lacking. Would you be willing to share what some of those what some of those were that you discovered during that process?
Yeah. So keeping in line with those 5 cascading dependent questions, I didn't have one sentence. I didn't have which was key. What is the aspiration? It's kind of like, as a person, I think that we all should be able to answer, what's your purpose in life?
Yes.
As a human, we should each be able to answer that. And that's critical to get out of bed and what we do. And then that sets the guidance for so much else. For a company, that seminal question is also very important, right? What's your aspiration? So, great. And then where do you want, because we can't be all things to all people.
Right.
So those beliefs and understanding and clarity, there was no 2 people saying the same thing.
Okay. Again, the lack of cohesion, the lack of unity, the lack of, there were obviously things that held the culture together, but some of these, what we would call business fundamentals for the 21st century, were not there.
There was what the company functioned at that time, right, is sociologically, it functioned as a tribe. So what was the true problem is, sociologically, a tribe is typically up to 12 people. When I came in, it was 45 people.
Oof, gosh. Yep.
So you had great inefficiency, and you had bottlenecks where you had just because of that function.
Yes.
So everyone wants to reorg, but that's just moving players around, but for what purpose, right? So we had to align is aspiration, what's needed, and designing all those out, and then making sure, okay, who's responsible.
Yes. Well, and I'm thinking of, and I'm assuming you've read the book Blitz Scaling, that does a great job of helping leaders understand the limits to the type of culture you can have at your headcount size.
Yep.
And I have found too many cultures are trying to hold on to that tribal way of being at 44 people, or and forgive me, the labels from that book aren't in the top of my head, but we can put the link in the show notes because it's a fabulous book. Very, very helpful. You're trying to operate like a 75-person culture at a 575-person culture. The tools are not the same. The leadership style is not the same. The hierarchy is not the same. It does not gel. And so leaders have to learn how to lead at the level. Employees have to learn to be in the culture that they're in versus trying to hold on to their tribe that they used to have.
Yep. I oversimplified it, and I used the terms it's a tribe, it was a community, and then we're a society. So, and similar to that book, Crossing the Chasm, above 12, and you get to that community, but when you get up to 100, now you're a society.
Yep.
So, and there's arbitrary numbers in here, and you can prove that was basically what we had to address.
Yes.
And then in doing so, well, great. There was a lot of wonderful relationships, a lot of wonderful tribal knowledge, and great artistry with many of the people here of maintaining the legacy systems. Really top craftspeople. But some of the technology instruments had progressed.
I was say they're not called legacy systems for a good reason.
Exactly. So now facing that, and how do I do that? So what I embarked on the journey, and we've completed that journey, and now we are scaling.
Yes.
And how to execute against that same hot mess. Now, how do I execute against it? So we needed 3 pieces of knowledge needed, right? You hire people for knowledge, skill, or talent.
Okay.
Talent's inherent, skill you develop, knowledge you buy. So the team, while they had a lot of knowledge and some skill, and what they lacked is, I'll call it, in business processes.
Mm-hmm.
So I brought in, and there's many things. I brought in what I thought were three of the most easy. You may be aware, but the first PR firm in the United States was started by Ivy, I think it was Ledbetter Lee, Ivy Lee.
Okay.
And he and his partners, the Rockefeller Group was their first client, and then the railroad. So this is in the early 1900s. So we have a lot to do. And when we did this, how do you keep it all? Because especially if you're in tech, you want to over-engineer. So Ivy Lee has something called the Sacred Six. So every day, the team has to write down what are their 6 in sequential order, the most important tasks they're going to get done in that day. You don't go to task number 2 until task number 1 is done.
Nice.
Old analog proficiency. Even though we're trying to move forward in our technology. Number 2 is now you have a lot of technologists, but you don't know how to handle something new, and you're going to have a conflict. If Stephanie, if you and I say, hey, we're going to make a new whiz-bang, and you have idea A and I have idea B, how do we reconcile that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I employed, the Thomas Kilmann conflict resolution model.
Yep.
So that way everyone would kind of recognize how they individually, because we all have at least one or a couple default methods that we handle. And if you're a real dominant person and you like to compete, well, then the really smart collaborator or accommodating person, their pearls of wisdom are never going to get applied, and it's always going to be. So, and then in order to the third, I'll call it, so that was kind of how do you handle conflict, right, when that's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
How do you prioritize?
Yep.
But now, who does what? And understanding, because now if you had a tribe, now the tribe's community. Everyone also went through extreme leadership by Jocko Willink, a Navy SEAL and the Navy SEAL leadership training programs, principles, And what I did is, rather than I lead those, because no one's going to speak, right? I'm in my position, no one's going to speak. Everyone's just going to say yes.
Yes.
So I brought an exogenous author leader in who lives this, right? So it was a former 82nd Airborne Ranger and, all types of credentials and published author to lead my teams, and through 12-week sessions of actually using this, but applying it every single week to what was literally happening in the company. So this wasn't theory. This was literally workshopping through real life, what's happening right now for accountability. Read back. How are we prioritizing? Okay, that conflict happened. How did you resolve it? And then workshopping with it, with real topics. So it was like playing with live fire.
I like it. So for those, just to level set for all of our listeners, what's the definition of extreme ownership that you all use?
If you're involved, you own it. So there is not a owner of the project, of the outcome.
Okay.
If you're involved, you own it, because you may be the lowest person in the hierarchy rank, but if you're involved, you own it.
And so you're just as responsible as anybody else for the result that project gets.
Absolutely.
Is that right? Okay.
All right. You are required, not only empowered, but you are required, right, to manage up, manage sideways, manage down, and communicate. And that's why there is not the fictitious open door, right? So, so that way those should be quickly remediated. And if they're not, and you agree to disagree using the Thomas Kilmann conflict resolution models, right, then bring it to, until you're satiated, right? And until it's not till you gave up, to you're satiated that it has been addressed.
I think that's a really important distinction, and it's top of mind for me because I just facilitated a group where the lack of decision, because people can't come to agreement, becomes the decision, so things don't move forward, which is very common in American work culture. Especially, I live in the Midwest where we do Midwest nice, and people just agree to disagree, and then they separate, and then things don't move forward. From your perspective, what does that practically look like when, let's say, a systems coordinator, I'm making this up, disagrees with the systems engineer? How do they find resolution?
Answering your question first with what I can constantly ask everyone. choose your hard.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard
Yes.
to go out of your comfort zone, to employ conflict resolution, to conflict with a superior, to conflict with another department, to push your viewpoint. That is hard, but it's also harder for the project to fail.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder for the company to lose money, to maybe have to do layoffs. Choose your hard. It's hard to raise that up, but it's also hard to have that burning in your belly that your ideas weren't heard.
Yep.
So I choose your hard is what we constantly ask of our team. And then also with that is making sure that everyone is, what's the read back? As part of that, right, is, okay, this is the outcome. Explain it back to me, or explain your task, or explain back to me in your own words.
Nice.
What that is. And that is, again, a SEAL leadership training, because in theater, crisp, clear, short, precise communication is critical.
Yes.
If you need 2 sentences, you know that you're over communicating.
Okay.
So, right? You think about being on a hot mic and you're talking that much. No, you're shot.
Yes. Yeah. So choose your heart, do the read back. Are there more?
There is. So we've employed, and there's a number of those, right? In order to crystallize what everyone's working on, we did employ project managers, right? So I brought certified PMPs in.
Yep.
They worked here prior to that. But the other is there's different tools. And I use a SARGE tool and an 8-stage business case.
Okay.
So depending upon what it is the read back that we ask is like a sit rep or a sitcom, not situational comedy, but
I was like, huh?
meaning that what is for what's being discussed and what's being brought. What is the situation? What is the analysis? S-A. R, what is the recommendations?
Okay.
G, following the acronym, is what's gained or lost. And then E is the human interest element, the extra, SARGE, situation, analysis, recommendation, gain, loss, or anything extra.
Okay.
That's a fancy way of saying if you can't tell the problem and the solution on a half sheet of paper, you don't understand it.
Yes.
So that way it's salient, right? Now you have a crisp, cohesive, here's the situation, here's the analysis, because maybe your analysis, when you share it with someone else, they say, oh, this is what you missed. Your recommendations, I didn't think of it. Now that makes sense. Or I didn't understand that we would gain that. I didn't understand that we would lose that if we did the other.
Yep.
So now you have it tight in one page where folks can understand and see the totality. That would be, I'll call it a key piece in order for folks to be able to make those communications. And all communications are required business processes to have those elements.
Okay. That's really helpful. Especially for teams that I find a lot of groups love to spend about, I'm just using this by way of example, 3 minutes on the problem and 57 minutes on the solution. And everyone is very lost in terms of what problem they're solving for. And there's a school of thought that says spend 55 minutes identifying the problem, and all you need is the 5 minutes to identify the solution and move forward. Yeah. And this is a detailed way to do that. I
don't know why, but the alleged statement by Abraham Lincoln, if I have 3 hours to cut wood, I'll spend 2 hours sharpening the axe.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So I feel that that's somewhat applicable here.
No, that's exactly right. That's really helpful. So you came in and implemented some formal skill development. You added talent, you added knowledge to the organization, which meant adding training, but also adding people by adding the PMO function. What progress did you see your organization make over the past several years?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. And I'll call it to add to that and add some additional clarity.
Yep.
I had earlier shared that there were 45 people here. Majority of them are still here, and the majority of them did stay. We did have some attrition. We did have a couple people, honestly, that we separated. I would argue should have been done years before I arrived. But with that, you had inferred that, and you're correct, that we added another 36 people So now if we have a legacy culture, we have new who are all coming with their own individual experiences, right? Because I have a very homogeneous pool of legacy employees.
Yep.
I have a diverse pool of experiences with new hires. And then we also, because we went 24/7, 365, for our efficiency, we developed an offshore team. So if you think about it, we now have 3 cultures.
Yes.
Legacy, unknown, and offshore. And it was the need in order to synthesize all of those together, not synthesize, but synchronize. And because I wanted to say symphonyize, but that's not really a word.
It could be.
Yeah, we'll make it. In order to bring them together for achieving the outcomes is the reason why I hired, as I said earlier, someone exogenous to lead it through. So now the teams where they would have naturally been walking down the hall and meeting each other, now in our hybrid work world, where folks are here 30% of the time, roughly.
Okay.
Some folks are rarely here because they live in another state or in another country. How do we bring them together? So that's why the in-person and virtual classroom mix of those, it required people to work together on projects related, and it also opened the aperture, right? So that way everyone's empowered to call anyone in the company and ask any questions they want, period. So by having them in those working groups, folks, it broke down quick barriers, and it took, I'll call it a year of getting to know someone. But now if you're working every week and you're working on problems related to it,
mm-hmm.
and you're forced, and it's designed that way, forced meaning that because you're in a class and you have to attend. So
highly recommended.
Yeah.
To maintain employment. Yes.
So that's what's evolved in the past. And that's been 2 years, right? Because this February, came in with the plan. The plan was made and it was approved after I was here 6 months, tooled up, and we executed against the plan. The majority, right? They'll say the vast majority is done. And that include everything from an infrastructure where we upgraded all of our tech stack, to the way the office looks, to virtually every contract, every vendor relationship we have.
Nice.
To we even renamed the company, right? So the company was renamed to something that was brought together by the employees. So they had their direct hand in voting and selecting the name and et cetera. So that was part of that cohesion.
Nice. I mean, that's a true rebrand in the full meaning of that word. You know, oftentimes we use the word rebrand to mean name change and logo change and colors change. No, that is not what a rebrand is. You all have gone through the true evolution of thinking through what your brand is and how that plays out with all of your stakeholders, how that plays out with all of your work. And then as a repercussion, your name, your logo, your colors, your tagline needed to change.
You're spot on. Not only did the employees participate, but our customers. When we went through it, we literally invited our customers to submit names, and we asked them primary market research questions of what do they think of when they think of us as not a name, but what do we do? What's our role? How do we serve them? When did they call us? What would we, and trying to put personification elements around us, what they would be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we evolved. And that was part of the selection process of how we came up with the current name and the look and everything from the colors to the tagline, and then our aspiration, right? Our commitment and our actions.
Awesome. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first is, what are the very practical skills that you saw your culture pick up because of these practices that you brought into the organization?
The main one is communicating outward, because at the end of the day, if I share we're a technology company, everyone kind of has in their mind's eye a vision of what our employees are emotionally, intellectually, physically, whatever you have a personification that you think of.
Okay.
So, and let's say whatever that is, or holistically, that's all true. I don't think in those descriptions you're thinking of the technology person being able to communicate what's the problem that the customer's facing on a customer call, interacting, identifying problem, and then being able to solution and communicate it back clearly with impassioned customer, right? Because if you're a computer engineer, you're not used to customer service.
Mm-hmm.
But we are a service company.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone here, at some point, at some degree, is going to be interacting with the customer. So it enabled them, and that was the real change, is in thinking, we're going to do X. How do we communicate that to the customer? Something went wrong, right? How do we send them, which we do, right? So how do we send them updates? How are we going to make sure that we're communicating when there's going to be a change, when there's going to be an outage, when something's happened? So that's really the change, is that now that we're a customer-centric, where before we were an IT-centric.
Okay. What other skills have come along with that in the culture?
What I've been told, I can't, of course, verify because I haven't seen it, is that one of my directors of engineering shared with me about a little bit more than a week ago, hey, that training, very passionate person, shares that those skills on how to talk through when there's a problem, I use those now everywhere. Right? I use it at home.
Yes.
And he shared that, and he's gotten feedback that they've noticed it. So that was right, because we all work, and we work because it's a fuel source, and hopefully we also have some psychic income that we get from our roles.
Yeah.
And for me, Stephanie, hearing that, right, because I know that we're better. He's definitely just a stellar contributor. But hearing that stellar contributor is also now better outside of the work office here, that was part of my psychic income.
What do you know now? I keep saying last question, but this is really going to be the last one, Brian, I swear. What do you know now about going slow that you wish you knew 10 years ago?
Oh, my gosh.
And really, this is a selfish question.
Okay. All right. Because I'll say is that I do think of myself as, and this is the internal voice, right? This is the 5.0 version, right? And you just asked what the 4.0 version was.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So my 4.0 version, because what they say when you in your 40s, it's right. It's bringing everything together. And what I know now, it's really about the people that I can bring together. And what I truly apply, Stephanie, is that I'll share with you is I'm very aware of what my weaknesses are. And it's not hubris, but I promise you I'm not working on them. I'm very aware, and that's the biggest thing I would now say between 10 years ago and now. I do not try to help improve the weaknesses of those who are working with me.
Yeah.
Right? I do not. They're working with me, they're hired, etc., for their strengths, and that's what we focus on. Yep. Sincerely.
I love that. I love that. Yes, it's a couple of years ago, I kind of came to the acceptance of my own weaknesses and kind of a contract with myself of like, I'm done trying to pretend that I want to make them better, because I don't. I want people I want to bring in people whose strengths are my weaknesses and plug those in together versus like making everything strong all the time, because I'm just exhausted. I'm just exhausted by it. I'm done. I'd rather enjoy life a lot more.
Exactly. And apply that same thing in every other facet.
Yes. And allow people the freedom and grace to not work on their weaknesses, but to revel in their strengths.
Agreed.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I enjoyed it so much. Part of the reason that I love this conversation with Brian is that, quite frankly, he got me re-inspired and helped me to rethink some of the ways that we can intentionally lead our people. And the number one thing that I'm taking away from our conversation is choose your hard. As leaders, we hear often, and we hear this with our clients, oh, change is hard and nobody likes change. It's so cliche that my go-to response now is going to be choose your hard. There are things about life that are hard. Choose your hard. We don't have to do all of the hard all of the time, but choose your hard. See the roadblock, do the roadblock, choose to get over the roadblock. These are terrains on the way to our bigger goals, and we have to be willing to accept the terrain for what it is. And then this tool that he shared with us, I think, is a really great framework for framing up problems to make sure that we are, one, solving the right problem, and two, solving the problem. Too many meetings that I witness or coach around, the team will jump to the solution way too quickly, and they don't actually understand the problem that they're solving for. And so if you'll remember the framework that Brian shared with us, SARGE, frame up the situation, analyze it, make a recommendation, identify what's being gained and lost. Should we choose that recommendation? And then the extra info that you want to throw in there, the bonus points of what makes this extra awesome, or what are other risks that we should be looking out for. So SARGE, situation, analysis, recommendation, gain and loss, and then extra info. All right, my friend. So if you got value from Brian and I's conversation, would you please share it with another change maker in your circle who would also get value? I would be unbelievably honored if you would share this with somebody else. And now let's get back to the impactful, transformative, efficacious work that we are being asked to do now and into the future. And I'll see you soon, my friend.